Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I want to continue here with Michael Aquino. This is kind of part two, and there probably will be more as I find more information. I want to cover his childhood now and give you information that has come up. Now, this comes from a 2019 interview, February 2019. Interview that you can find. I'll have a link down below to it so you can listen to it yourself. It's about an hour or so where Michael Aquino himself talks about his childhood, what he's involved in, his lifestyle, etc. So this comes from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Can we believe any of it? I'm always amazed with Michael Aquino. He comes off as such a Boy Scout. He's love and cookies and Oreos and ice cream and cotton candy. And here's a guy that is a special forces operative, military colonel his entire career. He's very much of a person who has went out there and being active, and he got involved in everything, has all these degrees in terms of different appointments. He was the head of fraternities. I mean, he got involved in everything as an overachiever is what you can say. So that's a lot of part of his life. Now, he states, and of course, this is from his mouth. So, I'm always looking for that because I've heard many things and I've been stating for a while that his mother made a lot of money and that's where the money came from. Well, that may not be the case. And here again, I read all sorts of things online like he's a general, he worked for the NSA. None of this can be substantiated. So it's all hearsay from people that want to make themselves feel important. We cannot tell what is right from wrong, especially since we get constantly bad reporting done by people who just really want attention. They want something new. They want to state stuff that cannot be verified, but makes them sound like, I got it in. And a lot of people like to repeat these things because it makes what I call now porno news, porno interview shows. There's something that is, it's sexy, it's weird, we got to look at it. I mean, it's hard to turn away from these kind of statements, and it makes you think, that's interesting. It catches your attention. So people push this on their interview shows, their radio shows, their YouTube channel, so that they have an audience, and it's really sad. We need to get to the truth here. One of the people who has been demonized, and that's not a pun, who's been demonized horribly, blamed for everything, and I just don't believe it personally, is Michael Aquino. The other one, of course, is the Process Church, who's been demonized for everything they do is evil. They're involved in all these criminal activities, yet nothing is ever been accused of them. Now, Michael Aquino has been accused, and I will get back to his major problems with child molestation at the Presidio and what that was all about. Well, what you don't understand is that it wasn't him only that was accused. It was a Baptist minister who was working there who was the main culprit. So the whole idea is that it's interesting that they just talk about Aquino and they never talk about this other guy. And I'm going to go into that when I'm going to read his book and the other information on it and get you have to hear both sides. But I don't believe anything. I don't believe either side, to be quite honest with you. There's thieving, rotten people out there that want to make a lot of money from molestation charges. There's the horrible basic systems we set up with incompetent people. Certainly the military can't be called competent. And of course the police that work with them. All of these people have horribly bad records of finding out anything of value. So we have this big, giant, stinky, rotten stew. And you got to go in there and pick out the meat that is good to eat and leave the rest behind. And this is difficult to do. And you must not have an axe to grind. Plain and simple. And this is quite a character, which I keep following him. As I said, I've been involved in this for many years after listening to different reports on him, the Temple of Set, and running into these people. I did go to school up in Santa Barbara, and there's a fair amount of these Setians up there, as well as listening to Roy of Hollywood, Roy Tuckman out of KPFK in Los Angeles, who did a lot of information on Michael Aquino. Now, I don't see much of that anymore, and I don't know if he plays it, but that's where I heard it, and he put a lot of it. And there were books written by a girlfriend who had an affair with, wrote a book on him, and he sued her. All the things that go with these things have been a long story here. Yet when you listen to him, he is Leave It to Beaver. He is, who else is going to say out there? Charlie Brown, whatever it is you want to state out there, this squeaky clean guy who's, and I've heard this from several military people that seem to don't want war and destruction. They're trying to find peace and how to solve things without killing people. And I heard this before from the guy who originated the first Earth Battalion guy, said the same thing, but it was more sarcastic from him. But ultimately, I read his book, and he's trying to start a new world and get people to work together. Well, I think this is the height of naivete. And I think that a person who claims to be so rational and down to earth like both these military guys, including Aquino, have to understand that people don't want to get along. And I remember, I think, I'm going to be reading all of his books and reporting back on them as well. But I believe I went with was it Mind Wars or whatever the first one was, him talking about people should get together and exchange positive. It sounds like a hippie, love and peace, man. Well, nobody wants that. The reason why there are wars is that people can't talk things out. People try, and it never works because people are at opposite ends, and there's really no middle ground. So you're going to have to kill each other. And this is how the world has worked from day one. But these military guys have to come out and say, well, you can do it differently. Where has that ever happened? I mean, the U.S. Army in the United States has been attacking every country that pops its head up for over 100 years at least. Ever since after World War II in particular, has been nothing but an imperial power. And we've got bases on almost every country in the world. It's just mind-blowing. But the 1st Earth Battalion, which I'll cover in another video, is quite interesting with his book and what he wanted. And they made a movie of that, the men that stare at goats and so forth. That was a manual that was written sarcastically. And what happened is that the American military, as dumb and as stupid they are, people like Michael Aquino, thought that, this is wonderful. We should go in and smile and play nice music and they'll be on our side. That was meant to be sarcasm. So it's amazing how all this gets twisted and everything else. It's really quite amusing when you get into how people don't get anything. Certainly, if there was a peaceful world out there, we wouldn't need the military and their $1 trillion plus budgets. All those people are out of work. They certainly don't want to do that. They want their golf courses, their big stores, their malls. They have a giant mall, the U.S. Air Force in Germany, with a Walmart and everything else. In Germany, which is a country that has Western facilities everywhere. Why are we doing that? This is just a giant whorehouse for crazy mothers like Aquino. Now, first of all, he states he had a wonderful childhood. No problem. He was the only child. And he had a great, and apparently he did. And he is a kind of, with all the stuff he's done, which is kind of contradictory, he claims to be an introvert. But, he's got all these medals. He's become these captains, these other things, went through the entire Eagle Scouts, became a representative for them. So, he's achieved the highest level, and you've got to be pretty active to do this. You can't be sitting in your room reading like he claims he was doing. So there's all sorts of things there, but we'll get into that in a minute. But the bottom line here as well is, so he had a great family, only child. His father was a first-generation Italian, whose family came from Portland, Oregon. And this all comes from Aquino. Now, I'm hoping I state everything correctly, but I'm going to leave the link down below and you can hear it from the horse's mouth. But, I listen to these hours and hours. This is what research is all about, people, and listening carefully and between the lines. And I've listened to this interview, which is about an hour or so long, probably seven times to pick everything. Did I miss something? What's the intonation there? This is real research, not reading. Now, I went on, before I actually found this, I went on the net looking pages on him, and there's just a bunch of unfounded stuff there. We don't know if any of that's true, as I said, including stating that he was a general, which I don't believe. He may have had contact with the NSA. After all, he was in psychological intelligence, but it doesn't apparently seem that he was a general in the NSA. So, unless that's some secret thing they put. So, if you get into the secret conspiracies 100% and you have no validity of any of it, well, then, he was Superman. Well, he wears clown shoes. He has a 18-inch member. So the whole lot of these things out there is it just becomes endless. On the other hand, we can't believe people's babbling stories. Now, he did write a bizarre autobiography going through his life and talking about it through the cars he owned. And he's apparently a car nut. And he was able to buy very expensive cars, and I guess he's had money there. And that's the other thing that, all these things are not followed up. I don't know if it's important or not, but I think it's important because I like to know where people come from. How did he have money? Who was his parents? Now, he talks about his mother a little, but he talks nothing about his father, which I find strange for a few reasons. And we'll get into that as well. So, his father was a first-generation Italian who moved to Portland, Oregon. His father and mother moved there from Italy directly at the time of Mussolini. This was escaping Mussolini in the 40s. So most people immigrated to the United States in the 1920s, after World War I or before World War I. That's when most people came. That's when my family came here from Europe. And the first generation, and people don't understand this, particularly idiot Europeans, that the first generation Americans were your parents. So, just like with Michael Aquino, first generation Americans were his parents. They were born here, and it wasn't people think that somehow it was great-great-grandparents and other things, but it's not. So his father was first generation, apparently joined a kind of like a merchant group, or I don't know if it was the merchant marines, he didn't say that, but a merchant seaman, and he was going up and down the coast, and apparently one of the places that he landed was San Francisco, and that's where he met his mother, or it would be his wife, whose name is, of all things, Betty Ford. So, how that happened. So that was San Francisco. Now, how everybody went from San Francisco to a place that's always been difficult to live at and expensive, because I lived there and went to school. Apparently, he spent most of his childhood in Santa Barbara. And let's talk about, we'll get to that in a minute. Because again, what's interesting is so many people that I came into contact with, or is popular now, is that I've had a lot of bumping into them and been around the same area. So I can give personal insights as well, which is very valuable to anybody seeking truth. Is there anyone doing that? Other than me? I don't think so. You want to hear sensationalism like most people, but you're not going to get it from me. You're going to get the facts, or what we think are the facts, what appears to be the truth now. If you've been listening to me, you understand what appears mean. So when we get involved in that, we need to understand that. So I find this guy to be fascinating because he's such a weirdo. Here he is this military man. He's always wanted to be in the military from day one. And what does that mean? He's a Boy Scout guy. He thinks somehow that, this is like a bad Hollywood movie where the two people fight and have some sort of laws. They did this with World War I movies, that there was that. Yeah, there's a little thing in World War I called mustard gas. Is that honorable to kill 5,000 people at a time or more, invented by the Germans? Which, by the way, is in physical form is injected in you as chemotherapy. It's mustard gas. Little facts. Put that little facts in your pocket. Write it down, fold it up, put it in your pocket, and keep it for later. So he doesn't talk much about his father, but he does say he was an investment banker. So he is basically, his father's the first generation. He's second generation. His father, apparently. Now, where all this came from, an investment broker, I think is the term he used, whatever that means. Broker. Yeah. That means stockbroker, other things, we don't know. Oh, he doesn't go into any information on that, but apparently there's lots of money here. Now, what I was originally read somewhere, was, we just don't know, is that, and it certainly could be, by the way, but he doesn't mention that. He's trying to, he always states things to make sure it all looks like Leave It to Beaver. So he's an investment broker. I don't know what that means. He was a stockbroker. I don't know if he made a lot of money or not, but he lived in an expensive part of the world, which is Santa Barbara. Very difficult to live there. High rents. It's a beach community, one of those old British type places where everybody there is old world. They move there and have family traditions. And it's very difficult to live there because of the cost of living. And of course, there's no opportunities. There's no jobs. There's no nothing up there. There is the Santa Barbara UCSB, which is the California College up there, which is outside of Santa Barbara, up in Isla Vista and other communities there. But there's really no work there that pays you anything. There's your usual doctor, lawyers, other things, and everybody else is a servant working for the rich up there at very low wages. It is a tourist town, so there's a lot of waitressy type jobs and those types of things. But there really is no industry up there whatsoever to speak of. So you can't really make any money there. It's the same old story. I don't know how people make money. And this goes back to the 70s, by the way, when I was living up there in the 80s. But the point is that, and had people up there I knew. So that's Santa Barbara to understand. So apparently his father was able to do well enough, and he talks about the cars he owned, which is part of his life, and they're all fancy sports cars, Ferraris, Lotuses, etc. These things have always been expensive, and he was able to afford them because somebody in his family was rich. Now, this tends to move over the fact that his mother, Betty Ford, it was claimed that she was in the actual real estate business and made lots of money. Now, it could have been him, and that she owned a lot of buildings and left him a lot of money, but apparently the family was pretty wealthy from day one. By the cars, even though he claims he couldn't afford this or that. His usual stuff. Well, I bought a Ferrari, but I couldn't afford more than that car. He could only afford one Ferrari. Okay, what does that mean? And where did that come from? And where did he live? And where was money come from? Of course, he constantly had military salaries here, and officer salaries. So it's not like they don't make good money. They do. The enlisted men get paid garbage, but the officers are paid well with lots of benefits. And if they're living on base or something, it means they have a lot of money to buy fancy cars. And a lot of military people had fancy cars just for that reason. They took that extra money that you would put into a house or a mortgage, and they put it into their car payment. But I don't know, again, unless we follow up. All speculation of it. But apparently that's what he's saying. Now, his mother, Betty Ford, he claims was a very artistic woman. She was a very special woman. She was a genius with what did he say? Her IQ of 187, which is unbelievably high. I think Einstein was 160 or something, or typical of someone who is considered very intelligent is 160. She was 187. She was written up supposedly in Ripley's Believe It or Not because she had such a high IQ. She was a writer. She went through Stanford University, which I'm assuming I don't know who paid for that, but since she was a genius, she probably got a scholarship. So she went through that very advanced private school in 3 years instead of 4 because she was so brilliant. She started the nonprofit radio company KPFK, which was interesting because that's the show that that's the station that Tuckman, who was doing all these exposés on Michael Aquino, worked for. So she actually started it in Northern California and Southern California, these nonprofit free speech radio stations, which again is kind of ironic. There's no mention that she did anything. He found some of her old poems, which he sells on Amazon, which I'll probably get as well, just to see where mommy was coming from. But he published, and again, she worked with your typical teachers and other things, and that's the reality of what's out there in terms of what she did. But it doesn't say that she did much of anything. She was an animal activist, which is interesting as well. So it's very difficult to get the ins and outs of this stuff. This is what you get in an interview. And unless somebody follows up and really wants to know intricacies of what is out there, you don't get that. And the interview here didn't. So you get very general information that's never followed up. I think what would have been appropriate, and I don't think you'd have a problem with it, is stating, it's always been said you had a lot of money. Where did that come from? Well, if his father was an investment broker, a stockbroker and other things, well, you can make a fortune doing that, and apparently that's what happened. His father did not have a college education. He was just a high school graduate. So he didn't go to any fancy schools or anything else. Mommy apparently was this super intelligent person. Hard to believe that those two would get together, this investment broker guy. Maybe he was an intellectual type or not, but here's a guy that doesn't really seem to have any college background, doesn't seem to be that pseudo-intellectual type that would. So she was an artist, she sculpted, she painted, she did all this stuff. Now, I was told somewhere, and as I said, it's all appears, who knows what it is. All the stuff on the internet is just put up there for shock value. I was told that she was a big-time real estate agent, and that's where his money came from. And she left him a bunch of money. Certainly could be. These highly connected people that are popular, that work and go to these schools and stuff, they get all sorts of opportunities. She may have turned in her upper-level fantasy, her little celebritydom, into a very profitable real estate business. And that's what a lot of people do, because you become known in your community. People come to you and you can sell them services. So we just don't know, but it doesn't talk about any of that. And he doesn't talk about where all his money came from and how his family was. He plays that down. But he claims that, of course, he had a very happy family. As he said, they were from originally, his father settled in Portland, Oregon. He claims that his personality can be known from two magazines. One of them is Mad Magazine, and the other one is Famous Monsters. He said you combine those two together, and that this kind of sums up his personality. I'm not sure. I mean, he does seem to be, he's got this strange, likable personality, very low-key, and seems to enjoy comedy. Now, he claims that he was an introvert, so I don't know what that's about. Now, he also, of course, studied, got good grades, went to Santa Barbara High School. Everything seems to be around Santa. He grew up in Santa Barbara. Now, where in Santa Barbara, I don't know, but he went to Santa Barbara High School, so it must be in the city-type area there. And, of course, there are many wealthy places there and around there that he could have lived. He was given an appointment to West Point, which he turned down as an officer. He'd go to West Point Officer Training School. He was offered that. Officers you have to get a recommendation to go to West Point. Apparently he got that. And again, how did he get that as an introvert if his family wasn't special? Because you generally have to have a senator or something recommend you. So he was offered that at West Point, but he turned it down. He also was offered a scholarship at UCSB, which is Santa Barbara, where obviously lived, and that he could go there on some sort of military type scholarship. And he chose that, obviously that makes sense to a large degree because that's where he lives. So he didn't necessarily want to be away from his family, especially since he had a good family, to go to New York State and be in a very hostile and regulatory environment, even though you think he was a real military jock type, that he'd want to go to West Point. Put that on your resume. I went to West Point. He didn't go to West Point. He graduated from UCSB, the surfing college, the hippy-dippy thing, the Isla Vista stuff that was going on there. But this is the kind of guy he wants you to think he is. This hippy-dippy kind of guy that was partying at in his own little clique of military people, which must have been scorned in UCSB, the very lefty place that it is, the very hippie place that it was, the surfing Santa Barbara place, is interesting. And of course, he was an Eagle Scout and rose to the highest ranks there in the Boy Scouts, so he was an Eagle Scout and got through that entire program with honors and even beyond that. So it's always kind of interesting to see that. It's the same old story with these kind of interesting things. He goes into a lot of things that are hard to believe. Again, squeaky clean. He was sent to Vietnam for 1 year only, and he has stated this. He stated this, that he was there from 1969 to 70 doing PSYOP stuff. Now, how much of that stuff was involved? It doesn't appear. He doesn't talk about necessarily being in the front lines or other things, but if he was working under special forces and other things, I don't know how much battle he saw. I don't know if he killed anybody. I don't like killing. I don't want to kill people. We want to take care of things in a non-violent way. That's why he got into PSYOPs, is he wanted to change people's minds to stop them from fighting physically to a more of a mental control. In terms of his background, his father, in terms of religious background, his father was Italian. He was a Roman Catholic, but like most Catholics, it was a very freewheeling thing that meant nothing. When she got married to his father, she went to a non-Roman Catholic church, some alternative thing. I forget what he said, but certainly that is no great effect, and he wasn't I don't know if practicing Catholic, what that means, but we don't know the details to that. Most Catholics go to church on Sunday and the holidays, and that's it. They don't really take it very seriously. They don't follow what the Pope tells them. None of that stuff. And it doesn't appear that he went through the confirmation, baptism, etc. We don't know. I'm assuming he was baptized, but the bottom line is, it doesn't seem like he went through any of the Catholic teachings that you'd normally go through as a child. They really didn't put any emphasis on that in his talks. So, I mean, as usual, a lot of times there's more questions that come up than answers. So we don't know now what's in question. Is mommy making lots of money and leaving it to him, or was it daddy who did it? I'm not sure it matters. He had a lot of money. He had, Ferraris and Lotuses and everything else as a young person. He claims he spent most of his time studying, which doesn't add up with all the different activities that he's listed as achieving. So you get into a good college. Again, he wanted high grades to do that. So that's what he has stated. And again, listen to the interview if you really want the full information. And again, keeping up with his Leave It to Beaver attitude, he doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink alcohol. He didn't say he doesn't drink blood, but so he doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink alcohol. Very interesting. As I said, this is this bizarre attitude that he gives out, which is strange to me. And as I've mentioned, his mother's maiden name was Ford, which goes back, which is I don't know if it goes back to Scotland. In his last years, he bought a big property in Scotland and made himself some sort of grand poobah there. I don't know if that goes back to his mother's heritage. The Ford name has mostly been traced back to Ireland, but is considered an Old English name that is all over the place. He claims also that he knows Harrison Ford. I don't know how he met him. We also know they had quite a conversation with and met many times with Sammy Davis Jr. He didn't state that there, but that is stated online in other interviews of his. So he knows Harrison Ford. In what way, I don't know. Probably because his mother's name was Ford. How you get those connections, I don't know. But he did have and met with Sammy Davis Jr. many times, feeling Anton LaVey, he has stated, treated him poorly. And didn't want much to do with him because Sammy really never came through with anything. He didn't come through with any support or money or anything else. So LaVey really wasn't too impressed with him, and I certainly agree with that. But of course, wanting to be in Hollywood that Aquino wanted to do was the fact that he claims, what the relationship is, what that's all about, I don't know. Harrison Ford is half Jewish, by the way, and I don't know what his religious affiliations are. I don't know anything about him, basically, other than his acting stuff, which I always thought he was a terrible actor. But let's talk about his wife, Lilith, a bit. And she was a model, I believe, from New York area. She went there and was horribly sexually harassed, quit that business, and I guess I don't want to go into the meeting there. Apparently, she's very non-active. You can find her in a few interviews talking about she agrees with the whole Setian philosophy. She apparently is very active in animal rescue. As Aquino has stated as well. Aquino has stated that he has a great love for animals and protecting them. Of course, that kind of ties into the animal sanctuary. Here we run into that, but something that a lot of people are into. So I don't want to extrapolate on something, but here we go into Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, which seems to do a lot of good work, but has this kind of satanic background with being started. They were originally the Process Church. They really couldn't make that happen. What they found out that they could make money with was with animal sanctuaries and saving animals, and they had many, many dogs, particularly German Shepherds, apparently, 10, 20 of these. They apparently had a sanctuary. The Best Friends had a sanctuary in Arizona and then bought it in Utah. Now, I have reading their book right now, and I've done a little bit on the pre of that book of talking about them from internet research and other things. But here we have one of these, if you want to read between the lines. So have they ever worked? I'm assuming they have with Best Friends Animal Sanctuary. And should we in any way be negative to this? They are doing a lot of good work, but they also have They have $100 million of income. And they do work with a lot of shelters, saving a lot of animals. And their whole goal is no kill, People don't understand that millions of animals are killed every year because they can't find them homes. So it certainly is a worthy cause. And apparently the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary is rated at, you could say, out of, from 1 to 10, they're rated a 5. And they seem to be very top-heavy, paying a lot. They make a lot of money, and they put it in their pockets. And how much goes of that $100 million goes to the animals is a little bit questionable. But it seems to be doing good work. There's a lot going on there. It's hard to find any bad things on them. What's interesting is all the animals charities are all rated poorly, and they don't use their money well. And there's been a lot of talk about the World Wildlife Foundation, WWF, who's actually been involved with a lot of, has alleged to have been involved with a lot of criminal activity, mercenaries. They'll go into Africa and take over poaching lands, and then they'll take the mineral rights from there, sell it to somebody else while they set up a small sanctuary. And these are the tricky ways of doing things. This is what's been alleged. You can't find anybody who's clean. But all of these, PETA and everything else, seem to, is what's reported online and from charity watchdogs, don't handle things very well. They're not rated very highly, which is interesting. But I don't want to get too diverse into that. We'll talk about that with other areas as well. And a lot of this stuff we just don't know. It's gossip again. What is it? But a charity organization rated Best Friends relatively poorly. They rated them as needs improvement, and I've looked up online all this stuff, and they don't treat their employees well. They don't pay very well, and they're under. That all goes to show you a bad organization that really isn't doing their job. They have 2 planes, they have a boat, I think, and they have a lot of this money, but why isn't that going there? They also have a huge property that is mostly wilderness, at the least. Why? So, but let's get back to Aquino here. But apparently she is into that. She's working in those fields. I don't know what she's working. Again, you don't necessarily want to be screaming your name out if you're doing something. I don't know how much money she has access to or what she does personally. But certainly going around telling people your name is Lilith, the Jewish demon, Aquino, is not going to necessarily be a factor there. So who she's working with, how she's doing it. But I wonder what the connections with that are, since she would find a very open and agreeable group at Best Friends, who were the Process Church, who certainly sympathize with the Temple of Set philosophically in lots of ways. So what are we to make of that? I don't know. It's interesting. But this is what he said. Now, I'm giving you information right out of Michael Aquino's mouth when I talk about him specifically. And as he said, he's this. He also has come up with kind of a ridiculous statement. I can't believe that's true, but who knows? Because already someone has come out and said they had an affair with him. He said he's a total non-sexual person. He's only had sex with 2 women, his first wife and his second wife, Lilith, and he's had no other sexual contact. And of course, he likes, again, say, oh, I like it, or this and that, sex is good. Well, we don't know. He's been accused, and again, without any corroborating evidence, because I haven't had anybody come forward or read any articles on it. Some people have alleged that he's bisexual. We just don't know. So it's the usual story there. But that's kind of, here's this guy who's in the military for all these years, stationed all over the world, going to all these military bases. And the only sexuality that he's had is with his wives. It's hard to believe these kind of stories. And also shows you how kind of juvenile he is. He's got a very juvenile way of looking at this. Guy's like he's living in this fantasy world, which he does. Living in Santa Barbara with a rich family is about as much as you can get, leave it to beaver, that there is. It is a fantasy world. It's idyllic. It's a beautiful small town with perfect weather and beautiful streets and rich people and a giant beach where you can play volleyball and surf. So it's very idyllic, and it's almost like this is the world he's living in for the rest of his life. And I'm not sure why he moved out of Santa Barbara. He moved and spent most of his time. Of course, he was stationed there, but he spent most of his time up in San Francisco because this is where the people that supported him more were. Of course, he was at the Presidio up there, but there's a lot of property up there, and that's where he lives and lives today, or did live, as far as I know. That's also where the P.O. boxes are and everything else for the Temple of Set. The person who's taken over the Temple of Set, from what I can tell, is some sort of black woman professional teacher that works at Berkeley, I think, is the only way I can trace her. And again, that's in San Francisco either. So, that kind of strange intellectual group that you get out of particularly Berkeley. So the Church of Satan was also in San Francisco, so which he was very much into and joined, and he talks about joining the church and how he liked all that, which is, based in, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all the stuff that he's really not into, but he liked the honesty of it. It seems to me there's some, listening to him is kind of like a mind screw. He's very manipulative. Of course, that's what he's all about. He talks like this, pretty much like your uncle, your grandfather, your nice person He doesn't talk anything radical. It's all peace and love, take care of animals, and so forth, is the way that he operates. So very, very upsetting there to understand when you listen to this guy. People who listen to him, and I watch the different comments, he totally convinces everybody that he is grandpa. So as simple as that. So with a person who's been accused as much as he had being in the business he's in, but of course, he's played Army as well. He's got involved in a lot of things that are basically, he was a speechwriter for Patton Jr., the son of General Patton. He was an intellectual within the military, which they always seek because they're known to be dummies, particularly the Army. So he's able to get around and do a lot of non-military things that have nothing to do with violence per se. So he was the intellectual type. He was able to do that. And, there's a lot of jobs in the military that don't have to do with cutting people's throats. So most of the military is not front line. I believe that's, it's less than 1% of the people are actually in the field. People are doing all the paperwork, the coordination, the making sure people are supplied properly, running the bases. It's a big goofball game of idiots that go in there. So the frontline military is very few of them. Now, he was in that for a year, apparently, in some way. but he doesn't really talk about the fact of he claims going different places in Jeeps and other things. I find that hard to believe in the Vietnam War that he was able to be that flexible and by himself. I mean, driving around to different villages is very dangerous, but he doesn't claim he was in an actual shooting situation from what I can tell. He was doing psyops, and he said he had this tape that he broadcast out of helicopters, and it scared the hell out of the Vietnamese because they thought they were ghosts. Well, this certainly could be true, and certainly could be very effective. If you start hearing voices coming from the actual sky, and you don't hear the rotors of the helicopter there because they were able to project the sounds down there, and it was supposed to be a ghost spirit telling them that they were left on the battlefield and other things that the Vietnamese hated. It scared them, and a lot of people just stopped fighting and surrendered. Well, I'm not sure how long that would work on anybody. Certainly it's frightening initially. I would think people would run away. I don't think they would surrender. These are the kind of stories he gives you. If that was so great, I don't know why that wasn't continued through many battlefields, and it certainly wasn't. He thought it was great. I don't know if anybody else did. I don't know if the major firefights there and all the things going on and the massive death squads that were created by there was the Phoenix program, I believe, that people think, and again, there's no proof, that he was involved with, which is the death squads where people went out and murdered. It's been estimated it could be as much as 80,000 civilians were murdered, where they sent out death squads to kill people. This is a common tactic that's been used for now 60, 70 years by the U.S. military working with the CIA. Is that, unfortunately, the reality of war is that the civilians are a big part of it. They support the enemy. So you can't really ignore them. On the other hand, having genocide against them is another issue, especially America says we never did nothing wrong, only do good. So the whole lot there is just nonsense. So they had death squads going out there. This was a big operation that has come forward. The Project Phoenix, sponsored by, and he may have been involved in that. We don't know. He claims he's none of that. He doesn't. Of course, if he's come off as this badass killer murderer, he would probably be in big trouble. Yeah, we like to kill people, and I help them take the enemy and murder them and blow up villages and told people how to torture people to put fright in them and then release them. Well, if he came out like this, he probably would have been in prison many years ago and convicted of so many things. So we must understand that we're getting this leave it to beaver attitude, which is very hard for me to believe that you could live that way. But you're living in a beautiful community, you're insulated, you have a high income. Well, these people live different. There's all different worlds in America. And depending upon where you live and what your family's income is depending on how you function. So if you're a poor guy living in the ghetto of Santa Barbara, which there is, particularly Latins, Mexicans, you're going to join the army and you're going to be in the front lines and you're going to be killing people and you're going to be part of the murder squads. But if you're a rich boy and you're an officer, well, you're going to be in the officers club writing manuals on, we're going to tell people psychologically that they shouldn't fight. And this is how war should be. So you got to remember there's always many, many different worlds in this society that you need to understand as a person living in it. So depending on your particular position in life, as most of it boils down to educational and economic, is totally different worlds. Completely different worlds. So we need to understand that. So whether he was able to insulate himself is not. It's hard to believe that he was not a smoker or a drinker in the military, because basically all the military does is drink, smoke, and screw. That's all they ever do. They're boring people with no objectives for anything. That's all they do. I mean, I remember a few years ago there was some problem with a female military officer with some sort of cases there, but she had sex with 5 different people in 2 weeks. That's your military for you. And they've always been known to be that way, as being the military in general are whores, they're alcoholics, they have terrible drinking problems, etc. So he escaped all that. He just put on his badge and everything else. And he could get away with it because he could write and speak the English properly, which most military, particularly at his time, didn't. And you got to remember there was a huge amount of anti-military in the 70s and 80s because this was the end of the war and during the war. And he came in there and was one of those poster boys for, we're not stupid. He can write his name. He can even spell history. Oh, he's a genius. So, and the whole idea is that he had to write speeches for George Patton Jr., whose father was a Nazi and a Muslim, and who murdered Americans. So it's been alleged. So the whole idea is that he would write for them because they're kind of stupid. And the Patton family certainly is not very intelligent, has been allegedly linked to a lot of different crimes and everything else out there, but he couldn't write. He contacted a kid. I want you to talk like my daddy did. So the point is that that's exactly what he did there, because they can't write in their own stuff, which is so typical. And of course, all of the Patton children became generals. I think that as soon as they joined the army, they were made generals, however that goes, that typical nepotism. Now, one interesting thing here, which I do want to clarify, which is important, that leads to his death. And again, this is from his words. So, and this comes from a 2019 interview, which, as I said, the link is down below there. And he has stated that at this particular time in his life, that he's pretty much of an invalid. He's on death's door. He's trying to get out as much information as he possibly can so that all of his works go on. And this is what everybody wants that makes any kind of organization or has anything to say, is you want to make sure that you write what's value. Now, so he has all of his books, and someone claimed who talked with him and said that everything he knows is in his books. And I think it's true. I think it's true that his basic techniques and philosophies and everything else there, he wants to leave this as a legacy. I think everybody does that. I want to do that as well, and I haven't hardly written anything of high-level value quite yet, and time's becoming short. But the point is that all of this is so his information. I think it's very important that everybody read that, including his version of the Presidio child molestation case, which was originally against a Baptist minister and others there. Now, how much this is twisted and everything else, well, you have to figure that out. There are certain things that don't make sense. He claims he wasn't even there at the time of these molestations, and that so forth. So also the states that now he could have been set up, we don't know. Children have claimed they knew how to get into his house, etc. They knew what it looked like. They talked about objects. Well, were they coached to say this? We don't know. It's obviously he doesn't have a conventional home. He's got black ceilings. He's got all these places he does rituals to. So Mr. Leave It to Beaver is not quite Leave It to Beaver. It's like going into someone's house and it looks normal, and then you pull the rug back and there's a giant pentagram underneath there, or other things. But he had black ceilings, he had everything else, and you entered his property in a unique way because he was scared of being attacked. So you didn't go in the front door. The child or couple have mentioned this as well. Now, was that a frame? I don't know. I'd like to see what he has to say about that and so forth. So he claims it's just all a money-grabbing thing. There were other incidents as well as child molestation, and I don't think he was there, but West Point had a big problem with... And Giuliani was a person who went there, investigated that, and apparently they paid out millions and millions of dollars to victims of the West Point nurseries, or whatever you want to call them, daycare centers. That was a big, big scandal you don't hear much about, but nobody was prosecuted there yet again. This is the kind of problems, and particularly with the corrupt military. The corrupt military covers up for everybody, and apparently they allow people to have massive clearances that run satanic churches. I mean, it's just unbelievable that that person wouldn't be considered a risk. So it seems to me it's a big risk, and it seems to me it makes somebody very vulnerable. And it's hard to believe that that wasn't pushed by the Russians and other things to state that, look at what this guy does. Or the fact of it, even North Vietnamese. And of course, none of this came out in those days without the internet, but of the fact that here's your typical evil American demon. Of course, Islam does call America the Great Satan. Well, here's a guy who has a huge, huge military clearance, was in NORAD, and allowed to get these clearances, who is a devout Satanist. He started a satanic organization. So we got all these problems out there that we have to look at, and what does it all mean? But every time you listen to this guy, as I said, he comes off like granddad, like your nice little granddad, and Very interesting. As I mentioned before, and he doesn't talk about that either. He totally ignores it. I don't know if that's for security reasons, but he did have one child, a boy, with Lilith. And the point is that they never talk about him. Apparently, he's very estranged from the family. His father died, and nobody told him, which means his mother, Lilith, is estranged from him as well. So he's never told this information. So is the gossip. This comes from a person who claims he read it off of court documents because he's suing the family for the estate there. Now, I don't know how he's taken care of or anything else, and this person also claims that he won't talk because there's a pending legal case, which I guess is the proper thing to do. So this must have been happened relatively recently, but nobody told him his dad died. He doesn't obviously talk to his dad. He doesn't talk to his mother. So there's an estranged situation. We have no idea why this is. Most people, but the fact that he never mentions him, etc. But of course, if you're a guy that people want to kill, that is a person that is dangerous, I'm sure he has lots of security and everything else around him, you wouldn't necessarily go out advertising you have a child so this child could be kidnapped, murdered, tortured, whatever. But that doesn't seem to be the case. What seems to be the case is daddy and mommy have completely cut themselves off from him, where they won't talk to him even on any basic levels, to the point that he actually has to file a lawsuit to try and get what is due him. So it's not like he could call, hey, well, what happened, mommy? What's going on? I know we haven't been close, but we are still family. Well, no, he had to sue the family for that. So this is what's claimed by a person who went through legal documents, which I don't give much credibility to this person, but these are pretty straightforward because they don't read the facts very well. They read them for publicity reasons. But the point is that we don't know. So that seems to be the story there. There doesn't seem to be any other children. There are no other children involved in that. And maybe they don't want him coming forward. I don't know if he's been paid off. I don't know if there's problems there. We just don't know. But he's not coming out trying to discredit his family in any way. He's totally alienated. And I'm assuming that's because of the fact that they have paid him off and he is getting a trust fund or something that they set up for him as long as he shuts his mouth. Because I don't know if he knows anything or not. But certainly he grew up in that family. He should know what's going on. So he would have been a major source that everybody would have went to if they knew about him. And that just shows you how secret things are kept and how he only gives you half the story. He's not giving you the full information. And of course, he knows that. He said that as well in interviews that, he can't talk about military stuff because it's secret. And that he would have serious problems and they would throw him in prison. So what does that mean? It means I can't tell you anything or I'm lying to you. So this is the problem with all military stuff. You can't believe anything coming from the military because of the fact they're under serious legal restrictions that could get you killed, thrown in prison, etc. So this is a serious and true issue. That's not gossip. And if you think that anybody talking out there is just talking out of their hat, so to speak, and they're going against this, it's nonsense. Everybody knows who's doing what out there, and they do all sorts of little things to hurt your credibility if you're a real person or not. And you've got to understand the disinformation type campaigns that are out there. Now, he does state here, which I think is very important because there's been a lot of actual discussion and doubt of what did he die of. His death certificate claims that he died from a gunshot to the head. Now, then people want to say that, he was somehow did this out of despair, they were after him, or he knew stuff, etc. Now, he did come out a few years ago and stated that 9/11 was a CIA Mossad operation. And I forget if he mentioned somebody else in there as well. So that's what he said. He's another one just to confirm the fact that this wasn't some Islamic plot there. And it goes on to so many other things. So he did confirm that. And I tend to obviously believe that. Then there's so many other people. That is such a bizarre situation. It's even funny with there actually being cars and stuff melted that were 2 blocks away from there. All sorts of weird stuff went on because they used particle beam weapons, which would do this. But he did confirm, and this is, and now we're talking about which is actually 2019, where this February 2019, this interview was actually put on YouTube, where he talks about this, and he talks about the fact that, and apparently he was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. And he had many operations. As a matter of fact, he said they removed his colon, they removed parts of his stomach. He's in very bad shape. And this is why he's writing as much as he can, getting things out there, etc. And he is very ill. He can barely see. This is all the stuff he has stated personally here. Now, he's had 2 major surgeries and almost died from the first one. So he's kind of hanging on by a thread here in 2019, February 2019, of his life. So he considers that, and has even told this person that he's lucky he's got this far after these operations where he almost died from, which of course makes sense. So he is, I think it was 73, 72, in his early 70s is when he actually died, which isn't very good of a long term to live. Now, you should be living to be 76, 78, somewhere in that range. Most people that are of his class and his medical stature generally live to be their mid-80s, at least, and even into their late. But apparently he got cancer. He got colon cancer, and this destroyed him. And it caused, and this started in 2016, and he's on his last leg. And he certainly isn't functioning, so I don't know if people were blaming him for anything from 2016 up to his death. But as far as we know, this would be impossible. This guy is a wreck. He's on his deathbed. So he states. Some people are even claiming he's not dead. So to think that suicide at a point at this is in any way wrong is not. And it's a way of choosing your own death instead of going to a hospital, being filled with drugs, sitting there for months or weeks, and going through something that is not going to have a good outcome. So as a person who is a stronger type person who knows that there is no answer to this and doesn't fear death, I mean, he doesn't see death as anything but a transition into another reality, which is true. So the whole idea is there's nothing overly special about this life. And if you're suffering and he's already tried to fight this and get over it, he knows he's going to die and die soon. Does he want to do that? Do you want to put your family through that? Do you want to go to a hospital and die there? Well, you die in your wealthy mansion around all your stuff in an environment that you enjoy, and you then commit suicide. That is not a weakness. That's a strength. A lot of people don't understand that. So having a bad life and just being depressed and killing yourself is something that is wrong. You should fight as much as you can. But if there's no outs, then you should be picking the time of your death. This is part of gnosis, is you pick your time of death. You don't become a victim to it. You pick when you want to die, and then you do it. So the fact that he would shoot himself in the head, being completely destroyed of cancer, makes a lot of sense. To think that there were outside pressures, that they were coming after him for stuff, I don't believe at all. This guy's been operating. He's 73 now. Even though there's always the bizarre thing is that they will kill you no matter what the problem is, they will get you like they got Rodney King 30 years after his harassment, after what happened with the police, where he brought all this. They will follow and ultimately kill you. And of course, so there's always that aspect. But if we get too much into that, it's endless speculation with no proof. So we have to be very, very careful. These are all the things that, so it appears that he did shoot himself in the head, and that this was his choosing of his death, which makes sense with his philosophy and everything else. I don't think there's any glory in being taken to a hospital, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for something that is hopeless, and then keeping you alive as a vegetable or in terrible positions for months or years. There certainly is no answer to that if you're very sick. Simple as that. So to think that wouldn't be true certainly is. So all the things fit in here. So he has stated personally on this show that he's had cancer and was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 2016, and that he was suffering from it, that he went through 2 major operations. He had his entire colon apparently removed, part of his stomach. This guy is in bed. It's amazing he was able to survive from the first operations. So he has stated this personally. This is not hearsay. Now, whether he's lying or not, I tend to think he's not lying. I tend to think that this is the truth here. And of course, now he's living in Argentina with Hitler and Elvis. These are the kind of nonsense you run into. That he's now escaped because the pressure was on. I don't think there's any pressure on him at all. Michael Aquino is a scapegoat. They blame him for everything. And I don't believe that any of this stuff that he's been accused of, it has much validity behind it. He's the scapegoat. He's the red herring, just as the Processed Church is, because everybody knows them. The Processed Church was everywhere. They were targeted to be the scapegoat. So was he. I can't believe that he would be at all these places doing all these things, directly involved at child abductions, etc. Now, was he involved with some of these things at sometimes? I have no idea, but it's hard really to say. His squeaky clean, and we've already caught him in a lie. He's had several affairs. The fact that he said he's only had sex with 2 people his entire life when he's traveled the world, you kind of tell me he hasn't been involved with prostitutes and other people and all the kind of groupies. Well, we already know that he's had an affair with someone else. We caught him in one lie. Now, is he this big bad Satanist running things? Well, it could be. He could be helping, assisting, and managing some of these what are international and domestic pedophilia rings that seem to be all connected to Satanism. And these have been documented in many cases, and his name comes up. But the problem is he's an easy target. Everybody knows him. And that's the other reason why you'd want to be very careful. Why would you go around doing stuff when you're easily identified? Of course, they are very protected. These people do not get caught in situations, are prosecuted, and there seems to be a complete veil and a security that is done by the feds and local, by all of law enforcement, feds, state, local, etc., protecting these people. They are people you cannot touch. Was he involved in all these things? People had named him everywhere. Well, I mean, just because they name him, and it shows that, this guy knows what he's talking about. This Aquino guy is well known. He was on TV. He was on Geraldo Rivera and all of these things. So it gives you fake credibility. You're just using somebody who's known. So we don't know. And I think that he's the only one doing. Nobody else seems to be named. People aren't giving other names. They're not talking about other people. There aren't other photographs. I mean, there are some other names, but he is named with everything. And I think that's a little bit ridiculous. And I think to track him everywhere and connect him to things is kind of a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon nonsense that you can connect him to different things. It's hard to say. But we have confirmed as best as we possibly can from the horse's mouth that he had cancer in 2016. This finally took him. He was very sick. He had this huge operation. I'm assuming this stuff could be kind of traced. I don't know where he had the medical care at. I don't know if it was locally in Santa Barbara and so forth. And did he die in San Francisco? So he may have went to a military because he's not living, as far as I know, in Santa Barbara any longer. He moved to San Francisco, and that's been his home for many, many years, 20, 30, 40 years now, that he's out of San Francisco area. So it appears that this is the truth as much as we can, at least the fact that he had cancer and he died from it. And most likely, this is not suicide in the traditional sense. Suicide we all see as a irrational move made by somebody who is in a high state of depression and they kill themselves. That's not necessarily all types of suicide. He did kill himself because he had horrible health and he was going to die anyway. That's what the real information says here. So I don't know if I find more. I'm going to keep updating this. This is part 2. There may be 3, 4, and 5. We'll see how it goes when we find more information here because we're seeking the truth here. Now, it appears that he was very ill and it appears that he did shoot himself, and this now does check out. And it does make sense. Well, someone else reported this saying, well, suicide's not normal. When you have stage 4 cancer and you're dying, it's normal. This is the kind of misinformation and utter feces, stinking rotten feces of how these people interpret information, which is why you can't believe anybody but me. Because these people are goofballs. They're doing stuff for publicity purposes, trying to tie something into it. They're trying to say he killed himself because other people were after him. Yeah, cancer was after him, and he had half his body cut out. I mean, this is a serious, serious problem. So all of this is the reality there. So you have to know the truth. We have to find out what's going on, who is really involved, and not be chasing a bunch of red herrings while the bad guys are doing everything behind your back. It's hilarious. It's like people, the old cliche I like to say is the fact that, your house is on fire and you're out in the front lawn mowing the grass and you don't see the house on fire. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that's exactly what we're doing. We got a bunch of people dragged out cutting the grass in the front lawn while there's a bunch of other things going on. And we must remember that people like Aquino are able to function because of high-level corruption. It's not him. He's nothing but a pawn. He's nothing but a piece of the game. The people know what's going on and allow these people to do things. Things like Giuliani, who didn't prosecute anybody at the West Point molestation cases. Why? Why was no one brought to justice there? Yet they paid out supposedly millions and millions of dollars to the families who had legitimate cases. So what is this all about? We need to find out whom is causing all this, not blaming him for everything. So a lot of this just doesn't make sense. There's some guy out there saying, I was trained by him. My father was a molester in Nebraska or something, which seems to be a hotbed for corruption and so forth, as was documented in the Franklin case. And I'm sure all these things are right, and you can look at the corruption there. But it's not just him. He is nothing more than one of the many cogs in the wheels that we have to get to who is running everything, and we need to stop corruption. So, but it is interesting to find out with this guy because it's kind of a very weird case that we have this high-ranking military officer who's so blatantly out there doing things and nobody cares. That's interesting in its own self. The problem is he's so obvious. What can we make of all this? So it's very interesting. These are all the details. So I think we got a good idea of who he is, where he came from. There's still a few dark areas. I'm not sure if it matters, but he didn't state how wealthy he was and where that money came from. Initially, it was thought to come from real estate, which certainly could be. An investment broker could be selling real estate. An investment broker means anything, stocks and bonds, real estate. Now, if you were smart at the time that his parents were operating, there was a huge real estate boom in California. And people who were smart bought a bunch of houses, resold them, and made a fortune. Now, a lot of people got involved in that because real estate is not that complicated ultimately, especially, it's buying and selling. I wouldn't be surprised that his very intelligent yet artistic mother was a real estate agent making a lot of money. But he glosses over that. Betty Ford, well, she was an artist, wrote poems. It's this kind of strange look at. And the fact that he won't mention he has a child even now and so forth shows he's covering up. So he's not filling in pieces. The state that he's only had sex with 2 women his entire life, I think, is the epitome of leave it to Beaver nonsense. So there's a lot of cloudy stuff here. I do believe he's sick. He's announced this many times, unless this was totally staged. But I can't believe that either. You just don't disappear. Things could be traced. People could find out these things if they find out where he was buried, what happened to him, etc. I'd like to see the death certificate personally, not someone telling me what was on it, because what I've heard doesn't even make sense of how they stated it, because generally they don't state locations and stuff. They state what was the cause of death, and obviously this is a bullet to the head. That's what the cause of death was. That's right. But why did he shoot himself in the head? Well, because he was dying of cancer. So, this is how They said this with Colin Powell, who recently died, saying that he died from COVID-19. Yes, he had COVID-19. He also had stage 4 cancer for the last 4 or 5 years. So it was a coup de grace. The point is, he was very sick. He was very on death's bed, and COVID pushed him off. But what did he really die of? Well, he really died of cancer. The little push off the cliff was COVID, supposedly. So that's how all these things work. Again, it's hard to get concrete answers, but I think we're getting a much better understanding of him, which you don't hear anywhere else. And you've got to not listen to his interviews per se. You have to get the opinions of someone who knows this type of person, who's been in this area of study for many years, who can interpret what this guy is saying. You can't take things at face value. All the people that take things at face value think this guy is, wonderful. Well, I don't think that's the case. Yet he wants to be the good army guy fighting to keep the world peaceful. As I said, I've heard this from many, and there's been several popular New Age type people who are military people. I think there's a guy named Damien or Daniel or whatever. He had a near-death experience. Now he's the New Age guru, and he was ex-military. Well, I have a problem with that. And these were people that were in the front lines as well. So I don't know if that is a stimulus to the fact of seeing the world, because now you're in this very violent, seeing death all the time. This should bring you to a realization if you are smart. But this I've found from a lot of this kind of things that go on. Yet the military in generally, with all the corruption that goes on and all their terrible policies, really are not Boy Scouts. They're in no way whatsoever. They're very corrupt institutions that really have never achieved anything. And they're a boys club, and there's lots of problems, and they're taking trillions of dollars out of what we need for housing and medical. For what? To fight whom? This is all nonsense. And then you get these kind of guys, which they like to put out there. But it's hard to believe that the military would allow someone like this to keep going. He eventually was thrown out of the Army or forced to retire after the Presidio incident. But the point is, he's been around for years. And everyone knew this, and nobody really cared. And I think to a large extent, the military wants weirdo freaks that they can manipulate and also use for their very deviant practices. They are developing psychopathic people, and that's what the military is all about. You've got two types of military people. You have the special forces type, which is what he was, which are basically psychotic murderers. They'll kill anybody, anywhere. That's their job. They don't think about it, and they're not fighting for God or country. I've met many of these special forces people. They all have the same attitude. And then you have the masses of those people want to waving the flag, or they join the military because they don't have any other opportunities. There is no schools they can go to. They can't afford it. They're low-class people. They're poor, and they put them into their little gangs, and they teach them how to, you only function as a little gang here. And that's how they're able to fight. And so they fight for each other in their little gang. And when you take them away from each other, they're powerless cowards. And that's your typical average enlisted man. So that's the two types of military people you have. And you don't win wars by patting people on the head, even though Aquino thinks that he can talk to somebody and they're going to put their gun down or use some influence. Well, it's not going to work. And even if you influence a person in that particular moment, later they're going to pick that gun up again. So it's very naive. What I remember, and I'm going to reread his books of what he was saying, that, get people to agree, get the energy going. What are you talking about? I mean, that doesn't work. That's imbecilic thinking. Unfortunately, people don't agree. And the reason why there hasn't been as many wars is the fact that people are afraid of total devastation, meaning being nuked. Nobody wins a nuclear war. So nothing is left. That's what stops wars. But it doesn't stop wars entirely. Conventional wars have been going on even after the invention of the bomb. Hundreds of them, by the way. So it's not like people were afraid that they were going to get nuked, and there's never been a response against bad people ultimately to stop them from having a small conventional wars. Certainly we've had large wars in the Middle East for over 20 years now, where millions of civilians have died. But we're going to ignore that. So I hope this is very informative. As I said, as new information comes up, I will let you know. Until next time.